Can I get Hollow Knight's true ending and get a refund from Steam? In case you didn't know, Steam has a policy where if you have under 2 hours of playtime on a game, you can request a refund. So I need to not only defeat the Radiance, the secret and much harder final boss, but I also need to go through all the tiny painful steps to get there. And I need to do all of this on a fresh copy of Hollow Knight within a minuscule time frame of just 2 hours. Well, let's see if it's possible. After jumping down into a deep pit lined with massive boulders, we end up at King's Pass, the starting area of the game. This is where the player would get the feel of the game's basic controls and combat systems, but I've already played this game for a concerning amount of hours, so I sped through this section with some beautifully executed movement tech. Once we crawl through to the top of the passage, we're greeted by a giant ornate wall that we can break through, allowing us to head over to the lonely town of Dirtmouth. There's literally nothing in this town besides Mr. Elderbug, who we sadly cannot stop to talk to. A little bit further ahead, we notice that there's a well that we can jump into, which would land us in the next area of the game. The Forgotten Crossroads is a maze of caverns and caves and is home to many different hostile insects, one of which is a very important boss that we're going to kill later. Anyway, we head off to the left, drop down through this large central room, and continue to navigate my way through the crossroads. Along the way, we literally almost die because of my complete lack of attention, which would have instantly ruined the run. That reminds me, one very important thing that I need to do during this run is to play cautiously. As remember, the time is ticking, there's a deadline, and I've only got one shot at this. After some further exploration, we find ourselves in our very first boss fight with False Knight. Luckily for me, this guy is a complete pushover. All I need to do is smack him with my nail until it's revealed that I'm actually fighting a shell inhabited by a tiny little maggot. After about a minute or so, this idiot breaks open the floor that he's standing on, sending himself hurling towards the lower level. I jump down and finish him off with a couple swipes of my nail and head off into a very important sub-area of the Crossroads. This place is called the Ancestral Mound and is, kinda creepy, to be honest. We enter this giant building at the very top of the room and speak with this guy, the Snail Shaman. The Shaman offers me a gift, what he calls a nasty little spell. But collecting this floating white orb knocks me completely unconscious. We wake up on the other side of a locked door and are now stuck in here, but we are able to use that spell that I was given earlier. Now, Vengeful Spirit, this spell, is going to be my main source of heavy damage from here on out, and is basically the only feasible way that I'll be able to beat some of the later bosses in time. Anyway, getting back to my current and very unfortunate situation, we need to find some way to escape this place. Luckily, after a little bit of platforming, we come face to face with the final obstacle I need to deal with to get out of here. This Elder Boulder blocking my path forwards can be easily taken out with a couple of fireballs. Drop down this hole and speak with the Shaman, and he, for some reason, just lets us leave. So, with the Vengeful Spirit spell that we got, we can now head back up through the large central room of the Crossroads and head off to the left, where we can find another Elder Boulder who's blocking my path. Killing him leads us straight to the next area of the game, Greenpath. Now, the reason we're here is to grab the Mothwing Cloak. The cloak essentially just gives us the ability to dash, which we'll need to reach certain areas in the game. The only issue is that the cloak is pretty far away from where we are, so we need to do a little bit of exploration before we get to that point. Once we get to this room, there's actually a cool little skip we're going to do using this mosquito. We lure him up to here so that we can pogo off of him and make it up this ledge without needing to grab the Mothwing Cloak at all. Anyway, after a little bit of exploring, we find ourselves back in a place kind of like the Forgotten Crossroads, with the same dark blue tint and rocky walls. We kill a couple of the bugs along the way to build up my soul meter to the max. That way we can kill this guy, the Vengefly King, instantly. Except that's not what happened at all, because I accidentally dropped too far down, meaning my fireballs didn't even connect with him at all, which is pretty annoying. But we eventually kill him and collect all the geo that he drops on the floor. We're gonna need a lot of it later. Anyway, we later find the room where the Mothwing Cloak lies. The only issue is that this lady's guarding it. This is Hornet, a bug that looks and acts surprisingly similar to me. Anyway, this boss fight is not too bad. All we have have to do is dodge her attacks and hit her with fireballs until she eventually goes down. We both stand in silence for a little while before she runs away. Then this vessel flops over and drops the Mothwing Cloak for us to pick up. We now have the ability to dash. Then we just quit back to the bench at the Ancestral Mound, as it's much faster than walking all the way back there, and head through the Forgotten Crossroads. Now, the reason that we're here again is because we need to do the most important skip of the entire run. But before that, we first need to prepare. We quickly collect all the geo in this chest, then head over this way to start the boss fight with Gruzmother. This is probably the saddest boss fight in the entire game. We can literally just hit the thing a couple times and it dies in like 2 seconds. Anyway, we collect the geo, deal with the remaining Gruzzes, and head over into this building. This is Salubra, who owns a shop selling charms. We're gonna buy one called the Shaman Stone. Now, this thing is extremely useful. It literally boosts my Vengeful Spirit's spell damage by 33%, something we'll need for a lot of the harder boss fights in the game. Once we've equipped the charm, we head over to the left into this building where we find Sly. All we need to do is talk to him and he snaps out of his weird trance-like state. Now, this guy owns a store up in Dirtmouth that we're going to be buying from a couple times later on when he eventually heads back up there. Oh, and now it's time to die. Yep, you heard me right. We just walk over to this corner and let this little guy beat me to death. Now, the reason we're doing that is for the big skip. Whenever I die, a ghost called a Shade spawns in that I need to kill to fix my broken soul meter and get all my geo back. The cool thing about this guy is that I can pogo off of him with my nail, meaning I can reach certain high up places that I wouldn't normally be able to get to. For this skip, we'd first need to build up our soul meter to the max, then reset the Shade's position by walking into Salubra's shop. Now, this is the tricky part. What we do is lure the Shade over to this very specific spot, jump into him, pogo off of his nail attack, then shoot a fireball, pogo off of him, shoot another fireball, pogo off of him again, and then dash up onto this ledge. And that right there skips an absolutely massive portion of the game. So we're now in a little sub area called Blue Lake. It's literally just what the title says, and the only thing that we're gonna do here is leave. We enter into a place with architecture similar to that of the Forgotten Crossroads, except instead of rocks, masks line the walls, which is a little bit weird. We continue to head over to the right until we're stopped in our tracks by gigantic white barriers. The only thing we could do at this point was look at the text on the stone in the middle of the platform. It essentially explains to us that there are 3 things called Dreamers that have sealed the vessel away in a protected area. Now, we don't know what the vessel is yet, and we also don't know where exactly it is, but after reading it, dream catches explode across the screen as we drop to our knees. Then the 3 Dreamers that I just read about show up and send me into some weird, bright golden void. We jump off the edge of the platform in hopes that would at least let me leave this place, but it just sends me right back. That's when a giant glowing moth shows up and starts spawning platforms for me to jump across. We follow the moth until it leads us here and explains that we're in a place called the Dream Realm, and that the only way to leave this place would be to grab this, the Dream Net. Then everything fades to white as we wake up next to the Seer, a moth who tends to the graves in this place, the resting grounds. We drop down here, sit at this bench, and activate this stag station to then travel back to the Forgotten Crossroads once again. So now that we have the ability to dash, we make our way into this room right here and are now able to reach this ledge, which allows us to head down into the Fungal Wastes. This place is a stinky mushroom and acid infested area right in the middle of Hallownest. Now, the reason we're here is to make our way to the Mantis Village, the place where we would find a very important item that we'll need to progress. But we'd first have to navigate our way through this place to get there. Now, there are a couple of detours that we're going to be taking along the way, such as here, where we fight and defeat these 2 giant mushroom guys to acquire another charm notch. We'll need it later. And here, where we fight our first warrior dream, Elderhood. Normally, this boss fight is pretty quick, but the idiot kept spamming the attack where he disappears for a while, which meant I wouldn't be able to even hit him at all. Anyway, after an unfortunately long amount of time, we finally defeat him and collect his dream essence, a sort of currency that we can use to trade with the Seer in the resting grounds. So after a little bit of further exploration, we find ourselves in this room. Now, I could technically pogo off of this enemy's projectile to get up here and skip like a minute of walking, but I didn't learn it well enough to be consistent or confident with it, so I just went along the normal route to get to the Mantis Village. So after a bit of walking, we enter the village, the place where multiple mantis species reside, and also where we would find the Mantis Claw. Now, to get it, we need to hit this lever level, head up to the higher platforms and grab one of the claws out of this collection. This thing basically allows us to wall jump, which will be extremely useful for the rest of the game. We can then quit back to the resting grounds bench and head down here. So we're heading back in the direction of the blue lake, because now that we have the dream nail, we can jump up onto this platform and fight our second warrior dream. This guy is called Zero and is super easy to deal with. All he does is slowly shoot swords at me. The only thing we need to do is hit him a couple times with my nail to build up soul, then absolutely destroy him with fireballs. After collecting his essence, we can head down here, squeeze past this guy, and take this giant elevator down to a place called the City of Tears. This place is the capital city of Hallownest and is covered in an infinite rainfall that comes from the ceiling above, hence the name. After walking through a small maze of corridors and elevators, we find ourselves here, where we can activate the King Station. But we're not going to take a stag anywhere just yet. We're first going to jump up here and pogo our way across these spikes to collect this treasure. We then quit back to the bench in the resting grounds and go talk to the seer. With the dream essence I've collected so far, she gives us another treasure and opens up this locked door for us. We can then make our way through here and jump across to this waterfall where we can find a secret passageway that leads us straight to another treasure. After we collect it, we can quit out and head back over to the King Station. Once we're here, we enter into this giant central room and go through this specific door. Now, the reason we're in here is because it's home to this guy, the Gorgeous Husk, who, after dying, drops hundreds of geo on the floor for us to collect. If you haven't already noticed, we're trying to save up enough money to buy a very important item from Sly, the guy we saved all the way back in the Forgotten Crossroads. Anyway, we continue to head over to the left, where we can take this elevator up to these platforms, where we just do a little bit of parkour and collect the last little bit of treasure that I'll need. We can then head over to the right where a merchant has set up shop. This guy can buy all of the treasure we collected off of us in exchange for a ton of geo. Then all we have to do is quit back to the bench at King's Station, head over to Dirtmouth and walk into Sly's shop, where we can buy the Lumifly Lantern, an item that will illuminate extremely dark areas in the game. So with the lantern now in my inventory, we head back over to the Forgotten Crossroads station and enter a dark cave where we can open a door for a small price of 50 geo. This leads us into a place called Crystal Peak, a huge mountain full of giant shiny rocks that has been slowly carved away by pickaxes. Now the reason we're here is to grab Crystal Heart, an ability that we need to cross extremely large horizontal gaps and to do some pretty cool skips later on. But we'd first have to head through the mines to get there. Oh, and whilst we're making our way through here, we go ahead and grab the shopkeeper's key, which we'll get back to Sly later on to unlock some extra items at his shop. So after navigating through the mines for a little while, we end up at this platforming section. Now this is where we're introduced to laser beams, which was kind of giving me a little bit of anxiety for a certain upcoming boss fight. Anyway, after almost dying due to my immense skill issue, we grab Crystal Heart and quit out. Once we load back in, we can head over to Dirtmouth to return the shopkeeper's key to Sly. He then unlocks his storeroom and pulls out a bunch of brand new wares, which includes the Elegant Key, something that we need to buy. We then quit back to the bench in King's Station and then launch ourselves to the complete other side of the City of Tears. We then head in here and ride the elevator up to this floor. Now, to get up onto this ledge, we would normally need to double jump, but using whatever this thing is, we can pogo off of it and jump up. We climb up through this room and head to the left where we can sit at this bench. We might need it for some just-in-case scenarios for upcoming boss fights. Anyway, we then head down here and defeat this great Husk Sentry, who was guarding a lever that opens up the door on the bottom left side of the room. We can head up through here, squeeze through this corridor, crystal dash to the left, and hit this lever to open this door. We can then climb up here, dash to the right, and get ready to fight a Soul Twister, an enemy that has learnt to use spells against me. But regardless of that fact, he goes down pretty quick. Heading up lands us in a place called the Soul Sanctum, an area in which enemies would try to learn how to use soul to make themselves immortal. We can now put the Elegant Key that I bought from Sly to use, unlocking this fancy door and heading into a boss fight with Soul Warrior. Now this guy would be fine on his own, the only issue is that he continuously spawns in these stupid enemies called Follies who just fly into me at the most inconvenient times. For literally 99% of this fight, I was on 1 health after a chain reaction of brutal damage, and somehow I managed to pull through and defeat him. Now the reason we came in here to beat this guy up was because he was guarding something called Shade Soul, a massive upgrade to our Vengeful Spirit spell, which doubles its damage output. After collecting it, we quit to the bench I sat at earlier and make our way back through the room above this one. So we're now going to go straight up here to fight the Watcher Knights, who guard the first streamer we're gonna defeat, Lurien. Now these guys are pretty tough, but I've got a couple tricks up my sleeve. We can head up here, break this wall, and cut this rope to drop one of the chandeliers on a Watcher Knight. Then we can quickly dream nail the Watcher Knight's shells before the fight even starts to build up our soul meter to the max. Our strategy for this fight is pretty simple. For the first Watcher Knight, when there's only one in the arena, we'll be fighting more than one at a time after this guy, we only use our nail on him. No spells allowed. Then, once the second one spawns in, that's when we can start using spells. So what we're doing here is getting the first knight to half health, then the second knight spawns in, then whilst in the process of killing that first knight, we get the second knight to half health. And then the process just keeps on repeating. Now, the reason we're doing it that way is just in case I screw up big time and need a heal. It's next to impossible to heal when there's two giant idiots bouncing around the arena. Anyway, we actually managed to get through the entire fight whilst only taking one hit of damage, which is pretty impressive if I do say so myself. Then we just head up here, collect the geo in this chest, and take the elevator all the way up to Lurien. Once we're at the top, we dream nail Lurien's physical body to enter into her mind. That way we can defeat her from the inside, breaking one of the 3 seals on the Temple of the Black Egg, which I now knew was where the vessel is. Once we wake up, we can head all the way down here to access the broken elevator shaft, then jump down whilst avoiding all the spikes and enter a passageway that would take us to the next area in the game. After heading through this giant room full of enemies and pitch black architecture, we find ourselves in a place called the Ancient Basin. We can drop down to the bottom of this room, fly over to the left, activate and sit at this bench, then crystal dash all the way to the other side of this massive room. After a little bit of exploration and a couple encounters with these Morlurks, we can make our way over here. Now this guy, Broken Vessel, can be a little bit tricky at times. He jumps around the arena, dashes at me with his nail and shoots blobs of infection at me. But since he's pretty slow with most of these attacks and I have an absolutely overpowered spell, we can defeat this guy pretty quick. But we're not done yet. We have to dream nail him to enter into his mind and fight the much tougher version of him. This guy is called Lost Kin and is actually a very difficult boss fight. Part of the reason why he's so tough is because he has a lot of health and I only have the crappy starting nail. Not to mention he's also way faster. Anyway, after dodging countless attacks and launching numerous fireballs at this guy, he finally goes down. I should be happy, but we're literally about to go fight another extremely annoying boss. But before we do that, we first need to collect this guy's essence, head over to the left and grab this brand new ability, the Monarch Wings. Now this thing basically acts as a double jump, which we'll need to reach high up places later on. Anyway, we quit back to the bench we sat at earlier and can now double jump up here, leading me straight to the Ancient Basin Stag Station. We hop on the stag and head back over to the resting grounds to talk to the seer. Now the reason we're doing that is so that we can get a special charm called Dream Wielder, which essentially just makes the Dream Nail much faster and more powerful to use, something that we'll need when we head back over to the Forgotten Crossroads. Do you remember False Knight, literally the first boss fight we did in this run? Well, we're now going to head back over to where he is to Dream Nail his ghost and head into his dreams, where a much harder fight with him takes place. So the first half of the strategy here is to just avoid getting hit entirely. Failed Champion, the new name for this guy, deals 2 damage per hit, which is not good for us. The second half of the strategy is to dream nail him whenever we have the chance, which is usually right after he jumps over us. That way we can build up our soul meter. We can then spam fireballs in his direction, which gets him down pretty quick. After hitting his stupid little face a couple times, he finally drops down and we can defeat him. Then once we wake up, we can collect his dream essence and then quit back to the bench in the resting grounds. After talking with the seer, she gives us a brand new ability called Dream Gate, which allows us to set warp points anywhere on the map, something that'll be extremely useful later on. Anyway, we head back to the King's Station and immediately place down a Dream Gate when we hop off the stag. Oh! Also, before we move on, I want to quickly ask you to subscribe to the channel so that I can beat my competitor, Hakita, in subs. We're pretty far off, but I'm sure we'll get there eventually. Anyway, we head down through the old King Station, crystal dash through this cave, and end up in a place called Kingdom's Edge, a rocky mess of cliffs that's covered in white ash. Now, the reason we're here is to grab something called King's Brand, an item that marks anyone who bears it as the King of Hallownest. We'll need this soon to head into the Abyss, where we can unlock something that's pretty important to the run. But in order to get King's Brand, I'd have to make my way through Kingdom's Edge. The only issue is that the way that I need to go is only accessible with Isma's Tear, the ability that lets us swim in acid. You know, that's what I would say if I didn't have any tricks up my sleeve. With Crystal Heart, we can actually fly into this room, dash perfectly under this rock, and hold jump immediately afterwards, which lands me in the acid. The good thing is that we respawn on the other side, which allows us to continue onwards. After a little bit of further exploration, we spot Hornet at the end of this tunnel and immediately chase after her. We'd need to find her in order to gain passage to the King's Brand. We drop down and enter the arena. The doors lock around me and we get ready to fight Hornet in a much harder second boss fight. This time, Hornet is way faster and can chain together quick attacks without any hesitation. She also, around halfway through the fight, starts putting spike balls around the arena, which we could run into if we aren't careful. A majority of this fight was spent at a nerve-wracking 1 HP. Keep in mind that even a single death in this run could make it completely impossible for me to beat it in under 2 hours. But luckily, I managed to defeat her without dying. We could now head down and grab the King's Brand inside of this giant worm shell, which collapses and crushes me immediately afterwards. Luckily, Hornet, with a change of heart, pulls me out of the rubble before leaving once again. She now finally understands that I'm capable of defeating the Radiance once and for all. I hope. Anyway, I can now walk back to the Dreamgate at King Station and head to the Ancient Basin, where we can put the King's Brand to use. Once we arrive at the Ancient Basin Station, we can then crystal dash over to the left and drop down here. We open up this door with King's Brand and head down to a place called the Abyss, the deepest part of Hallownest. Now, the reason we're here is to grab the Shade Cloak, which gives us the ability to dash through things, such as enemies and the Shadow Gates scattered around Hallownest. But we first need to navigate our way down this giant central room, avoiding all the enemies and spikes, then head through a creepy dark tunnel where things called void tendrils try to grab me and pull me under. But we make it through and soon find ourselves at the base of a giant lighthouse that we need to climb up. However, just simply jumping from platform to platform apparently isn't hard enough. There's a bunch of things called siblings flying around that deal double damage whenever they hit me. Somehow I perfectly maneuver my way around all of them. Well, almost. But we still make it up to the top of the lighthouse, where we can then flip this lever to turn the light on. With the light now shining on the Void Lake, we can dash over it without tendrils trying to pull us under. Once we enter and make our way through the following room of tunnels, we find a large statue holding up a bowl of void that we can jump into to get the Shade Cloak. We then quit out and load back in quickly, as it's faster than waiting for the cutscene to play, and can now warp back to the Dreamgate at King Station. So we once again travel through the old King Station to enter back into Kingdom's Edge. Now that we have the Shade Cloak, we can dash through this wall, which leads us straight to another warrior dream, Markov. This guy is extremely easy. He throws swords at us whilst kinda hovering around the room. With just a couple fireballs, he goes down pretty quick. If only Radiant Markoth was that easy. Anyway, we quickly collect his essence and then warp back to the Dreamgate at King Station. It was now time to head over to Dirtmouth. Now, the reason we're here is because we're actually going back to the very first area of the game. With our newfound abilities, we can climb up through the secret passageway, which opens up to a place called Howling Cliffs, a forgotten wasteland in the northwest of Hallownest. Now, the reason we're here is to fight another warrior dream named Gorb. Luckily, this fight is extremely easy. Gorb can literally be killed by just 4 well-placed fireballs. Once we defeat them and collect their essence, we can quit out, load back in, and start heading back towards the Forgotten Crossroads once again. After jumping back down the large central room and heading over to the left, we find a spot in this room where we can do another acid skip with Crystal Heart. This would then lead us straight down to Fog Canyon, a misty jellyfish-infested area that houses the second dreamer of the game, Monomon. After a little bit of exploration, we find ourselves in front of a door that leads us straight into the teacher's archives, where Monomon resides. We set a dream gate in front of the door and head in. This place is absolutely full of electric lumaflies and jellyfish, but jellyfish that we've seen so far are nothing compared to this one. This is Umu, a massive jellyfish that can spawn bursts of lightning around the arena. Normally, I wouldn't be able to even attack this thing, but with the help of Quirrell, Monomon's old apprentice, he dashes into the arena and slices Umu with his nail, which exposes its weak point. After a couple rounds of me and Quirrell weakening Umu, it finally goes down and the doors at the bottom of the arena open up. After making our way to this room, we find that Monomon is actually inside of this giant test tube. With the help of Quirrell, he exposes her physical body. We can then dream null her to break her seal on the temple. That's 2 dreamers down out of 3. After we wake up, we can warp back to our dream gate and head over to the left, where we place another one before heading back up to Greenpath. We can find a secret tunnel up here that leads us into a creepy dark sanctuary that contains another warrior dream. This lady's name is No Eyes and can either be a complete pushover or can be a complete nuisance to deal with. Luckily on this attempt, she was the former. I dodged every single one of her ghosts and killed her within seconds. After collecting her essence, I warped back to the dream gate I'd placed down earlier and made my way into the room to the left. With a quick and kind of unnecessary acid skip, we make our way from Fog Canyon into the Queen's Gardens, a lush jungle full of thorns and ornate architecture. We immediately drop down here, dash through the Shadow Gate, and continue to make our way through the gardens before getting locked in an arena full of flying mantises, where I literally almost die. I think I've gotten down to 1 health way too many times in this video. Luckily, we always managed to pull through in the end. We continue through the gardens and activate and sit at this bench before heading to another arena full of mantises, setting a dream gate at the top of this room and running through a room full of these weird fluffy frog things that just love to jump right into me. Anyway, we find a pathway at the bottom of this room leading to Marmu, a pretty easy to deal with warrior dream that bounces around the arena. We can easily defeat her with just a couple of nail hits and a fireball. After collecting our dream essence, we warp back to the dream gate I placed earlier and head up to this room where we once again are forced into an arena full of mantises. After I thought I was done killing all of them, this guy jumps down through a hole in the ceiling. This is Trader Lord, a boss fight that requires us to use our Shade Cloak ability a lot. What we need to do is deal a ton of damage to this guy whilst dodging through most of his attacks instead of away from him. After what felt like forever, one last fireball took him down. Now the reason we defeated this guy is so that we could go through here, into this weird hole, drop down a pit and talk to the white lady, who gives us half of a charm called King Soul, which is half of what we need to defeat the Radiance once and for all. The other half would be a lot tougher to get. Anyway, we quit back to the bench we sat at earlier and drop down here. This darker section of the Queen's Gardens is actually a shortcut to another area, specifically Deep Nest. Now, this place is creepy, claustrophobic, and extremely dangerous. There could be spiders or spikes at any turn that we make, and we'd have to be very careful not to die here. Now, the reason we're here is to 1. Defeat the final warrior dream that we need, and 2. Defeat the final dreamer to break the seal on the Temple of the Black Egg. But we'd first have to make our way through these cramped tunnels to end up here, where we quickly set a dream gate. Then we drop down and dream nail this tree. This is how we'll recoup all of the dream essence that we've used on warping to dream gates. The tree shoots out red dream catchers, and luckily for us, the path that we're taking is conveniently lined with them. Anyway, we continue to head straight up until we see an entrance lined with glowing pink mushrooms. This is where Galeon lies, the final warrior dream that we need to kill. His fight is honestly not too bad. All we need to do is dodge his giant spinning scythe and shoot a couple fireballs at him, and he'd go down pretty quick. And with that, we now have 1800 dream essence, which is the exact amount we need for something we'll get from the seer later on. We warp back to the dream gate we placed earlier and head over to the left, where we can find a village made purely out of spiderwebs. We head up into the largest spiderweb ball and climb up this wall. Now, what you're normally supposed to do here is sit at this bench, have these creepy dudes swarm you and chuck you into some random part of Deep Nest, then you'd climb your way out and find yourself standing right in front of Hera, the third dreamer. But there's a cool little skip we can do here where we crystal dash off at the top of this wall, then double jump up into this hole. We've essentially just skipped the entirety of the maze leading up to Hera, and instead just have to climb up a tiny bit further to reach her. We dream nail her physical body, enter into her mind, and defeat her, breaking the final final seal on the Temple of the Black Egg. You may be thinking that it's now time to go fight the final boss, but we actually first have to head back to the resting grounds to get something very important. With the 1800 Dream Essence we've acquired so far, the Seer can awaken the Dream Ale into its more powerful form. This will allow us to get the second half of King Soul. So we head over to the Ancient Basin station and use the Dream Nail on this Kingsmold corpse. Once we've infiltrated his mind, we can head over to the right where we find a large locked door and a living Kingsmold. After defeating the Kingsmold, the locked door opens and we can head in. So this place is called the White Palace, a white and grey feat of architecture full of an unbelievable amount of saw blades. You may be wondering, what do you mean by saw blades? Well, this place is home to the hardest platforming sections of the entire game by a mile. Any platforming that you've seen so far is nothing compared to some of the stuff in here. Anyway, after making our way through the opening area and killing another Kingsmold, we flip a switch that unlocks the doors to the elevator that would allow us to get to the higher levels of the White Palace. Now, this is where the real fun begins. We'd have to make our way through 3 separate platforming sections in order to get to the Pale King, the guy who made this place, and also the guy that has the second half of King Soul. So, for the first platforming section, we jump over this saw, jump over the second saw, drop down here, and crystal dash at this specific spot on the wall to skip a large portion of the room. Then from here, we just jump from platform to platform, dodging all the saw blades in my way. I meant trying to, and head up through here. Now at this point, I was kind of worried because I was on 1 HP, and in this room, it's very easy to get hit. So the first part of the room is fine, we just need to wait for all the saws to go to the left and climb up. The second part is the big problem. We have to walk between these saws, standing in the tiny gaps between each one. Just one step too far and I'd be dead instantly. But I somehow made it through. But the room's not over yet. We have to crystal dash between these saws and drop down to this platform, and now we're safe. We fly over to the right and hit one of the levers we need to access the third platforming section before returning to the central room. We quickly sit at this bench and then head up to the right to start the second platforming section. This one isn't as bad as the first one, but there's still some tricky parts here and there. The first room just requires us to dash between a couple saws, no big issues here. For the next room, we just need to climb to the top whilst avoiding all the saws along the way. Oh, and we can actually use crystal dash to our advantage here. By simply spamming the crystal dash button, we can kind of stick to the wall and make our way past the saws with ease. The next room has a really cool trick where we jump through this tiny gap, then crystal dash to the other side, essentially just skipping the entire room. In the final room, all we need to do is drop down through here, avoiding all the saws in the process. Oh, also, apparently you can just stand here. I didn't know that. Anyway, we drop down, hit the lever, and head over to the elevator to reach the final and hardest platforming section. For the first room, we hit these enemies so we can jump past them without getting hurt, then pogo off of these guys to head up and finish the room. For the second room, we jump over a saw, pogo off of this saw to then jump up this wall. Then with a little bit of crystal dash spamming, we can climb up here easily. Then we pogo off of this lamp to make it onto this ledge. Then we jump over here, head up, dash off the wall, pogo off of this saw, then double jump through to the next room. Here we can squeeze past these 2 saws to land on this platform, then we crystal dash off of this wall to make it in here. Then we can pogo off of the spikes, jump up here, and break this wall to unlock a shortcut. All we have to do now is drop down through these spikes and hit the level. But we're not done yet. There's still one more room. We jump over here, smack this guy, pogo off of these saws, jump to this platform, then climb up here, jump off of this wall, then press dash at exactly this point so we can double jump, climb up this wall, pogo off of these guys, and jump up. Then the only thing we have left to do is crystal dash through some corridors to end up here, where the Pale King's corpse resides. We take the elevator up, hit him a couple times, then grab the second half of King Soul. Everything fades to white as we wake up back in the Ancient Basin. We crystal dash back over to the Stag Station to equip King Soul at the bench. Now, you may be thinking, how are you supposed to equip this thing when you literally need a minimum of 5 charm notches free? Well, you just keep trying until it eventually works. The only issue now is that I'm overcharmed, which means everything deals double damage to me, which will be extremely annoying for the upcoming section. We head back to the abyss, drop to the bottom once again, and find that the floor is shaking for some reason. So we just stand on top of it until the floor gives way and drops me into the deepest part of the abyss. The place that we fall into is basically a maze full of siblings. Those annoying ghosts from before that deal double damage, or quadruple damage in this case since we're overcharmed. Luckily we make it through without having too many issues and can now do what we came here for. We dream nailed this egg and violently collapse to the floor before going completely unconscious. We then find ourselves back at the bottom of the abyss, buried underneath hundreds of vessel shells. Although something seems a little off. We're actually inside of the dream realm right now. The thing we just dream nailed was my birthplace, the egg that I came from. We're currently viewing a memory of the past. After climbing back up to the top of the abyss, we see the Pale King leading a younger Hollow Knight, the vessel, through the door before promptly sealing it shut, causing us to fall back down into the abyss. Our King's soul has now turned into Voidheart. The Void has acknowledged me as its master, and now we have everything we need to defeat the Radiance. This was it. The final part of the game. With all the seals broken on the Temple of the Black Egg, we catch a ride to Dirtmouth and head back into the Forgotten Crossroads. As soon as we get near the temple, the seal to the egg shatters. Hornet, who is full of hope that I can once and for all defeat the Radiance, watches me enter the egg. We crystal dash as fast as we can to the arena where the Hollow Knight resides. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. I thought you said you were going to be fighting the secret final boss, the Radiance. Yeah, I am, but before we can even do that, we first have to defeat Hollow Knight. Now this boss fight can be pretty tricky at times. We'd always want to jump and pogo off of him whenever he attacks me side on. That way we stay relatively unscathed. Whenever we can cause him to falter, it's either going to be time to heal or time to get some extra hits in. His first and second phases go on for a while, but after enough damage, he lets out a loud scream and starts to stab himself with his nail. I don't know for sure, but I feel like this is a moment of clarity in which he tries to help defeat the infection. Although this only worsens his own infection, and he gains brand new attacks because of it. However, after we deal enough damage, he screams for a second time, before getting pulled down by Hornet. We dream nail him and enter into his mind. It was now time to face one of the hardest bosses in the entire game with just 11 minutes remaining, the Radiance. Let's not focus on the time remaining. I'd need to devote all of my attention towards this fight as it goes on for a while. There's 4 different phases that you have to get through in order to kill this thing. The first phase isn't too bad. All we have to do for now is hit the Radiance, build up soul, and shoot a couple fireballs at her when I can. Now I need to do all of this whilst dodging all of the attacks that she's throwing at me, which includes laser beams, sword rain, homing orbs, sword bursts, giant pillars of light, and walls of swords. Not to mention that about halfway through phase 1, either half of the platform will constantly have spikes on it, which is very annoying. After dealing enough damage, we end up at phase 2 of the fight relatively unscathed. In this phase, the Radiance starts an endless rain of swords that continues to pour down on me until we damage her enough. After a while she goes down, but she almost immediately afterwards breaks free of the Void's grasp and flies upwards. It's now time for phase 3, arguably the hardest out of all of them. Unfortunately, there is no longer a large central platform that we can stand on. Instead, it's a jumbled mess of smaller platforms that we have to jump between. In this phase, the Radiance does every single attack that it did in phase 1, except this time she teleports around this giant mess of arena every 2 goddamn seconds, which makes it really hard to hit her with my nail. But after a hit that almost kills me, and a fireball that sends the Radiance flying upwards once again, it was time for phase 4. And just like that, we defeated the Radiance, removing the infection that had plagued Hallownest for years. And we did all of that in less than 2 hours. Just barely. Could this have been done faster? Definitely. It's just that it's kind of hard to reach perfection when you only have one chance. But the final question is, did I get my refund? Yes, I did.